Thanks again. And this present thank you, Philippe. I'm going to minimize my own video so I don't have to look at myself. So yeah, I won't be seeing anyone, although that's actually super weird. So I will see people. Okay, so my name's Olivia and it's a pleasure to be here. It's really wonderful to have a chance to present my research in this context. Thanks again, everyone at the Colloque. I really, this is great. And you're doing a fantastic job. So this presentation is entitled Immersion, Submersion, Embodiment and Empathy in Multimedia Installation and Virtual Reality Artworks. Bear with me, it's a bit of a hybrid presentation and I will do my best to tie it all together, but I'm allowing myself to share with you some of my thesis research, which I'm going to be writing as of January 2021 for my PhD. So in the last few years, I'm going to start with showing a few of the slides of my own work to contextualize my overall project in which I research other artists' work. The project is entitled Virtual Islands, Submersion and Hybrid Identity in Virtual Reality. And it combines a written thesis with a virtual reality and video installation, tying together the relationship between Caribbean futures as an alternative to Western techno-futurism, and the possibility of submersion as a post-colonial stance within VR making practice. So it's grounded in the violent histories of transatlantic slave trades, and it juxtaposes the notion of the Black Atlantic by Paul Gilroy and the notion of tidalectics by Kamal Brathwaite to formulate a notion of water as a historical space within VR creation. And I'll explain what tidalectics means right now. To counter the Western influence of the Hegelian dialectic of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, Brathwaite proposes a tidal poetics, or tidalectics, where the constant ebb and flow of the tides around Caribbean islands are constitutive to the philosophical framework around Caribbean identities. And so why am I interested in this? Because my own experience of cultural hybridity, being a white woman of mixed European and Caribbean heritage, is brought in Relation, this is a nod to Edouard Glissant, through a virtual encounter with water and self-portraiture in VR. So as a project between the written component and the installation, it invites a reading of VR practices as aesthetic, artistic creation, foregrounding submersion, the notion of submersion, over immersion in VR experiences. The theoretical approach my project is concerned with is how VR tends to operate on a universalizing basis that is implicitly Eurocentric or North America-centric and white. Whereas the Caribbean thinkers I engage with conceptualize the self as neither singular nor universal, creolized, hybrid, relational, but still specific. As a counter argument to VR as an empathy machine, Edouard Glissant, for example, offers new possibilities for thinking through the self as an interdependent, not entirely separable from those around us, without promising to ever completely inhabit the other, and in fact, resisting that impulse as colonial. This notion works well to counterbalance techno-utopist ideals of empathy that are often circulated within the conversations we have around VR, suggesting that yes, interpersonal and intercultural exchange is possible and even fundamental, but a notion of difference is still worth preserving. So I argue that Kamal Brathwaite makes us rethink empathy by proposing alternate fractured models of the self as grounded in a creolized Caribbean experience. So his notion of tidalectics is a really useful and really relevant theoretical framework for my project overall. And last image of my own work, very quickly, I want to explain what I mean by immersion, what I mean by submersion, and how this ties into the other artworks I'm going to be showing you today. So I understand immersion from technological, aesthetic, and cultural perspectives. I draw from the many definitions by new media scholars, Francis Dyson or Douglas MacLeod, and Frank Rose, who's a digital storytelling expert, for example. So whereas Dyson and MacLeod focus on the relationship between the technological devices of immersion and their artistic and cultural resonance, Rose, on the other hand, is concerned with immersive digital storytelling mediums and politics. So in my own work, immersion is understood as the exploration of a digital environment where viewers navigate virtually and follow guidelines prescribed by an artist. And the last but not least, submersion is understood through psychological perspectives and draws from my own experience again. I read a fantastic and inspiring blog post by Canadian cognitive scientist Dr. Kimberly Vall several years ago, where she defines immersion and submersion in interactive experiences and VR specifically. And this was the trigger for my interest in exploring that notion of submersion in VR. She distinguishes the immersive streamlined perception in which the non-core elements of an experience fade away from consciousness, such as when you play a video game. But she makes a distinction between the fact that it's not the same as being immersed in a body of water. But the two forms of immersion for her are often used interchangeably. Whereas for her, the submersive experience is understood as any situation where we are perceptually surrounded. And again, I'm quoting Dr. Kimberly Vall. She says that understanding VR as something submersive is the easiest way to wrap your head around it. So this allowed me to formulate an approach where VR is understood as submersive through the headset's physicality, where you're surrounded by visual stimulation and you're also being immersed in a virtual body of water. So I perceive the action of wearing the VR headset as a kind of navigation tool within that virtual water space. And so now I want to talk to you about a really inspiring project called The Machine to Be Another, Gender Swap Investigation on Gender Identity, Queer Theory, and Mutual Respect, which is an ongoing, more of an experiential research project where the VR headset is used, but there is no experience other than the fact that you're seeing the other at the same time as the other is seeing you. I experienced this work actually in 2015 during the FNC festival here in Montreal. So the way it's described by the creators of Be Another Lab, the overarching goal of the lab by the lab itself is to use technoscientific knowledge critically to promote human integration instead of alienation. So in this joint two-person experience, each user explores the embodied virtual perspective of the other person, whilst both users follow each other's movements and maybe touch each other, discovering how it feels to see from the other person's perspective. And it's an ongoing project, basically. Of course, I imagine with COVID, it's not at all the same. So I'm interested in just showing this work. I'm going to show a short clip of it afterwards. And it kind of contextualizes how I'm understanding VR, embodiment, and empathy in a larger sense, where I'm looking at the connections between the body as a political landscape and how it translates into the virtual space of VR. So on the one hand, I'm reading from feminist writers and sociologists to explore how the body is instrumentalized through gender and race. And on the other hand, I'm reading from academic research in VR and led by psychologists concerned with the affordances of virtual embodiment as a proxy for being in another person's body. So I'm focusing on embodiment and empathy here, and also how colonial legacies extend their reach to technologies which offer this opportunity of embodiment. And VR is a very good example, pre-COVID, I would say, when you could share. So I'm looking at, for example, the work of embodiment through the lens of gender and race is referring to the work of Sarah Ahmed for me. And she has formulated this notion of a phenomenology of whiteness, where she identifies how and why whiteness continues to operate as a default for bodies, but also for the space in which bodies operate within Western discourses. So my question is, how can VR suggest the experience of another person's body and that body's experience virtually, whilst considering the different physical bodies of VR users? And does a narrative VR work function better, or an experiential VR work better for this? On the other hand, I'm also reading from sociologist Ruha Benjamin and her notion of the New Jim Code, which highlights the active presence of anti-Black racism embedded throughout the technologies we use in our daily lives, and that includes VR. So I'm going to show you a short clip of The Machine to Be Another right now. I hope the sound is okay. Essentially just take over a little bit, but I think you get the idea. Sorry. So in this particular project, I find it interesting because it can lead us to think about how empathy is context dependent. And I'm questioning whether VR creators acknowledge this enough. Psychologist Jamil Zaki studies how empathy can appear simultaneously automatic and context dependent. He examines the relationship between levels of empathy and the amount of agency those studied have on this. So he suggests that empathy is a motivated phenomenon. So in other words, we have a certain amount of choice in when we decide to feel empathy. And so I'm wondering how that functions in VR's virtual space. Since any experience is designed by a team and they have their own subjectivity, and the type and level of suggested empathy is mostly going to be understood as prompted by them. And so, from a psychological perspective, you could think, empathy is mostly read as either cognitive or emotional. Then we have the famous pioneering VR film director, Chris Milk, who coined the very popular expression, VR is the ultimate empathy machine back in 2015, when he was advocating for the benefits of VR to solve major world crises. So I'm wondering how VR continues to reproduce the internal biases of whiteness whilst proclaiming to shift VR users' perspective in other directions. And again, I'm just going to refer and quote sociologist Ruha Benjamin in her book, Race After Technology. She highlights how technologies which promise to be post-racial remain actively racist. And she talks about VR and empathy, stressing the dangerous correlation between some VR creators' intention to show pain and suffering through an embodied experience and how, and I'm quoting, pain is repurposed as a site of economic production. However, these are lots of different references. I understand that, can lead to confusion. So I'm questioning this and I'm asking who has access to the tools of VR production, who is being represented in VR, and which audiences are VR creators thinking about when they make their work, and where can general audiences access VR experiences, especially in a COVID era. And to conclude with this, section of my presentation, I'm studying colonial legacies of whiteness in VR through an interdisciplinary study of empathy and embodiment. And it really echoes with Ruha Benjamin's claim that design is a colonizing project. So now I'm going to switch to an older VR project, which I guess many of you know already, by Char Davis, entitled Osmose. And I'm going to quickly speak about this work within the context of my research. I don't think I'm going to introduce Char Davis so much because I imagine many of you are familiar with her, but she was born in 1954. She's a Canadian visual artist. She's based in rural Quebec and San Francisco, and she began working as a painter. So she was the founding director of software company Softimage, which became a world leader in 3D animation and was used to create Jurassic Park and The Matrix, for example. She's also inspired by British painter J.M.W. Turner, and she mentions being influenced by seminal solitary experiences in nature, combined with her extreme myopia, which informs her aesthetic of layering, semi-transparency, and the dissolution of boundaries. So in this particular work, Osmose, which premiered at the Musée des Beaux-Arts de Montréal in '95, Davis required what she calls the immersant to use her breath as a navigation tool through an early VR environment. And so the immersant also becomes part of the installation itself. And I'm going to carry on through my slides. I'm going to skip through the video, but essentially, I really appreciate this way of contextualizing how the body of the VR user is brought into the space of the exhibition. And I want to just highlight a few more things about Char Davis. The fact that she, even though she worked in the high-end technology of her time, she was also, and I'm quoting her, not a techno-romantic. And she understood that the technology associated with the medium she's using is not neutral. It has come from the military, scientific, Western industrial, patriarchal paradigm. And so by default, the technology not only reflects, but reinforces dominant values, unless deliberately subverted by the artist. And that's a 2002 interview with Carol Gigliotti. I will continue showing you other artworks which question the use of the body in VR and in video installation. This is not a VR project, This is a work called Typhoon Coming On by African-American artist Sandra Perry, born in 1986, and she works in video, computer-based media, and performance. In this installation, Perry challenges the ongoing objectification of the bodies of Black people from within the historical canon. She refers to the same British painter J.M.W. Turner's painting painted in 1840, entitled "Slavers Throwing Over the Dead and the Dying, Typhoon Coming On," often referred to as a slave ship. And she uses open source software Blender, with which she applies an ocean modifier to an image of the painting, which she then transforms into a large-scale video projection, which covers a large part of the gallery space. I'm gonna show a short clip where Sandra Perry explains her work, and you'll see a clip of this transformation of a painting into a more 3D animated environment.
I'm always thinking about the Middle Passage, and I think that it is like incredibly important to think about the Middle Passage in relationship to so many things, in relationship to environmentalism, in relationship to labor bodies. A lot of conversations around labor are happening through kind of like these digital spaces, and I think that, you know, we don't have to reinvent the wheel when we're talking about kind of labor and exploitation inside of kind of like the digital realm, because it's a similar kind of like relationship when we're talking about people being moved over oceans in order to become like labor sources.
Okay, sorry. So I'll quickly run through this installation itself, because I'm very interested in how this particular work touches upon so many different themes within an installation. And this, for example, is an element of the piece called Wet and Wavy, Typhoon Coming On for a 3-monitor workstation. And so what you see there is an exercise machine in which hair gel was used to replace the water to make it essentially impossible to really use it properly. So what I really appreciate, and the reason I'm showing you this work amongst the other works, is how Sandra Perry uses her multimedia installations to challenge and complicate the many themes she's addressing, whilst, like Shar Davis, inviting the viewer to become an active participant in the work. And this is, again, something I'm particularly interested in my own work. So I will continue. This is the last still of Sandra Perry's installation. Now I want to switch to another work, which is a VR, has a VR component within a physical installation that I believe other folks have spoken about before in this conference. So I'll be quick, but I'm very, very interested in this project. It's called Neurospeculative Afrofeminism by the collective Hyphen Labs, and I have all the names of the different artists at the top of this slide if you want to refer to them all. Hyphen Labs is an international collective working at the intersection of technology, art, science, and the future. In this particular project, the creators designed a series of speculative self-care and self-preservation products for women of color, which inspired the creation of a narrative sequence for VR conceived within a physical installation. I'm referring to what the team quote as, this project is has an emancipatory approach to technology, and it explores aspects of oral storytelling from an Afrofuturist feminist perspective. And it sits at the intersection of product design, virtual reality, and neuroscience. The collective design, okay, I'm sorry, I'm repeating myself. Yeah, referring back to the sociologist Ruha Benjamin I mentioned before, she understands this project as recasting what counts as technoscience and whom we think of as innovators. Benjamin also highlights the potential for technology to become a tool for liberation once designers commit to combining an emancipatory approach to technology with a critical approach, which entails an appreciation for the aesthetic dimensions of resisting the new Jim codes. So I will continue by showing you a very short clip of the actual experience as I recorded it from the screen, watching it on YouTube.
Ooh, Audrey got a lot going on in her head. She must have had a busy week. Hey, baby, is this your first time contributing to the synaptic lineage? Well, let me tell you. In 2020, after the Turkle affair, the First Amendment was taken away. Soon after that, Brooks organized a group of neurofeminists to create the synaptic lineage. This is an autonomous network, gathering and distributing communal memories and knowledge. Collective experience.
Okay, so I'm going to go through real quick, but I was able to see this installation at Ars Electronica 2018. I believe it's been presented in multiple different settings up until, I guess, recently. And I particularly appreciate the use of a hair salon physical installation space with these kind of distorted mirrors that you see on the larger image on the right. And I believe in each installation, there are some variations. Some of the elements of the piece, which again, I won't go over in too much detail because I know this work has already been spoken about, but I really appreciate all the different elements that go into this work, including a nod or a reference to transcranial stimulation caps, which have not been designed with a variety of hair types in mind. And in fact, Ashley Backus-Clark, one of the Hyphen Lab collective members, says that she would have to cut her hair off or modify herself to be part of this, and she wants to be included in the segment of the population which is currently optimizing their brain. So with VR, the project capitalizes on the undiluted attention which viewers are in for a set of time, and for Hyphen Labs, they see this opportunity as VR becoming an optimizing machine instead of an empathy machine. And I'm quoting them: "It can get you through creative roadblocks. It can inspire you and empower you." And for them, VR allows users to embody a new character instead of being bodiless, as with some, referring to other VR experiences. So I will finish my presentation with another artist. So these are the trans stimulation caps that I was referring to. Last but not least.
Pardon, nous sommes un peu à la fin, donc
Wait,
une minute.
okay, I'll wrap up. So just to finish, I wanted to share the work of an American artist called Saya Wolfuk, who again is not a VR artist, but has created a series called The Empathetics. And I will let you discover that work. But in other words, just to finish, these empathetics are an X-chromosome race steeped in the utopian idealism of an all-female future. And her Shimatech is a corporation trading in the transportation artifacts necessary to achieve a higher understanding. The hybridity and interconnectedness of her subjects make clear that Wolfuk believes a complete transformation of society is both necessary and imminent, and therefore using the term empathy in a very different way. And so I thank you again for listening, and I hope this was interesting. Thank you.